As rumors started to intensify following the official cancellation of this year's Iowa State Fair, Knoxville Raceway has reinforced its message concerning the scheduled 60th running of the Knoxville Nationals. How is everybody doing? I'm Jay Elson, and this is Midco Motorsports. In a tweet released last week, the track reminded fans that no decisions pertaining to its marquee event would be made until July. For now, track officials continue to ask for patience and optimism. In the meantime, the races must go on, and they had a big one over the weekend with the World of Outlaws rolling into town for a two-day show dubbed the Brownells Big Guns Bash. That is this week's A Feature.
53 cars checked in to start the night, with 26 earning a spot in Friday's main event. Defending Knoxville Nationals champ David Gravel moved from the pole to the point off the start, but he would not stay there for long. Donnie Schatz sails around him early in lap 2. Fast forward to lap 6 now. Kyle Larson looking to overtake Schatz on the restart, but a great move gets wiped out when Rico Abreu flips mid-pack. Abreu was okay. Larson stuck with it though, and his persistence paid off. The 57 uses the bottom to blow past Schatz, and he would show the way for the final 15 laps. Kyle Larson takes night one of the Brownells Big Guns Bash, which included a $10,000 payday. One night later, Larson tried to do it again from the number 4 starting spot, and the 57 car would catch a big break on lap 10. Race leader Darren Pittman gets tied up with Gravel in turn 2. Pittman would return, but he finished 18th. Larson inherited the top spot for the restart, but he'd get some company a couple of circuits later. Brian Brown, who just logged his 50th career Knoxville victory the week prior, wrestles the top spot away. Larson actually fell back to 3rd there, but he'd get his momentum back by lap 13, and here he comes. Larson regains the lead with another great run on the inside, and this time he'd keep it. Kyle Larson sweeps the Brownells Big Guns Bash at Knoxville, giving him 5 wins in as many starts for the week.
Don Gumke was a fixture in North Dakota racing for more than 4 decades. Saturday, the folks at Jamestown Speedway honored his memory. We'll have that story next.
Midco Motorsports on Midco Sports Network is presented by Dakota Speedway.
A salute to the man they called the Grinder. Jamestown Speedway held its first Don Gumke Racers Memorial on Saturday night to pay tribute to a man who spent decades of his life chasing the checkered flag. Midco SN's Jody Norstedt shows us how his hometown track and former competitors paid tribute to a man whose impact on the racing community was immeasurable.
Knowing him, he'd say this is out of proportion.
Don Gumke raced for the adrenaline rush, not for the notoriety. That's why his companion of 38 years, Joanne Dieterle, could only smirk when earlier this week issues started to pop up for Jason Grimes as he practiced in Don's 2-star machine that he'd be racing in the first Don Gumke Memorial.
They were loading our car to bring it out here to practice with it the other night so Jason could get a feel for it, and it wouldn't start, and they looked and there was a rod hanging out of the oil pan. But it had run fine for him the day before. So Dale thinks that was Don telling us he doesn't like any of this.
But the racing community wanted to make sure the man nicknamed the Grinder received his due. The 66-year-old car junkie passed away tragically over the winter while working on his race car in Arizona. His tire marks are left all over his hometown speedway in Jamestown, from his 40 years as a driver to his years of co-ownership in the late 90s and early 2000s.
He was such a bridge between the racers and you know, the racetrack, because he had raced and he had such a relationship.
Every nickel he had went into the race car of some way. You know, he spent $10 on a roll of duct tape to fix his shoes to last the summer, and then used the duct tape on the car also. So every nickel he ever had, he stuck it into the car.
And it's that kind of dedication to the sport that led to Friday night being a marquee event. The night had several tributes to Don, including the Pales, all being in the twos. For example, the IMCA Modified feature winner collecting a payday of $2,222, a sweet taste of victory. But Don's buddies wanted that sweet taste to be felt for drivers win or lose. So they pooled together some money and bought complimentary bottles of Don's favorite wine for all the participants. The finest, Boone's Farm.
Don loved Boone's Farm, and back in the day when his drinking days, Don's words on the Boone's Farm, it's cheap and it's got a screw-on cap. So after the races are all over with, to come over here, we're going to have some Boone's Farm shots.
Camaraderie. Now that's something Don would appreciate about this night. As for the ones who miss him most,
It's just great to see all the fans here, all the drivers that came from long distances. It makes me really happy to see it.
You never realize how much of an impact a guy like that has until he's gone.
Thanks, Jody. The top two features at Saturday's Don Gumke Memorial paid four figures to win, including $12.22 for the Wissota Street Stocks. This proved to be a two-horse race between front row starters Jake Fremke in the 63 and the 51 of Eric Riley. Off the start, it's Riley edging out Fremke to lead lap one. Now, he'd never be out front by more than a couple of car lengths, but that was all Riley would need. One night after finishing ninth at Mandan, the Morris, Minnesota native cashes in at Jamestown. To the mod feature now. Jason Grimes, as you saw earlier, driving the two-star of the late Don Gumke. He would start on the outside of row one next to the 10 car of Austin Arneson. Grimes hung tough off the drop of the green flag, but Arneson is one of the top mod guys around for a reason. He starts to flex his muscles, building a solid lead over the next 10 laps. Grimes takes his shot following a restart with 12 to go, tries to duck underneath Arneson in turn 3, but the 10 slams the door. Grimes kept the pressure on, but Arneson never faltered. Afterward, the Fargo native reflected on what it meant to not only win the Don Gumke Memorial, but to hold off the all-too-familiar two-star to do it.
We sold the car that got second to us, Don's car, to him last year, and we helped him out a lot. We've grown a relationship with him. I'm younger than him, but my dad raced with him, and we're always hanging out, parking next to each other. So it was pretty fun to have him here with us, looking down at us and stuff like that.
Now, Friday was also a night of remembrance at Rapids Speedway. We'll recap the annual Mark Lloyd Memorial when we come back. After 5 years at Park Jefferson, this summer's Mark Lloyd Memorial shifted to Rapids Speedway, which Lloyd considered to be his home track. With that move came a big boost in bonus money, $5,000 in total, that would be spread among 4 divisions.
We will pick things up with the hobby stocks. Midco Motorsports producer Levi Vanderwaty still searching for career win number 1, and there he is in the 8 car. Couple of laps in, Vanderwaty makes his move on the high side, sprints past Dawson DeBoer as they head down the backstretch. Problem was, the guy everyone is having trouble beating was right behind him. And a couple of trips later, Dustin Gulbranson comes out of turn 4 with the lead, and he would never give it back. Vanderwaty kept the 6 car in his sights, but it just wasn't meant to be. Gulbranson gets his second win of the year at Rocky. He's now finished first or second in 7 of his 8 hobby stock starts this season. There has been no runaway in the B-Mod division thus far. That group had already crowned 4 different winners on the season, including Derek Van Veldhuizen, who drove his 20 car to victory lane in week 1. But Tyler Johnson was determined to make this his night. Johnson, who worked his way up from 5th, doing all he could to chase down Van Veldhuizen, and he catches a break right here. And that was all Johnson needed. In fact, he ran away after that. Tyler Johnson gets the win and also takes over the lead in the points. One guy that's found his groove in the USRA stock car division is Dustin Larson. A week after taking his second runner-up finish of the season, the driver out of Rushmore, Minnesota, found himself right back in the mix. Larson jumped 2 spots to 3rd off the start, then started hounding pole setter Chad Overgaard in the 42. After a caution slowed his roll, Larson with a tremendous restart, which ultimately helps him take over the top spot. Overgaard bowed out shortly thereafter with engine issues, leaving Larson to try and fend off Darren Cordles the rest of the way. And that's exactly what he did. Dustin Larson takes the checkered flag for his first win of 2020. The night's main event featured an $1,100 top prize for Mark Lloyd's personal favorites, the late model street stocks. Pole setter Billy Prouty led the opening circuit, but that would be all the longer he'd be able to hold off Zach Olivier. The Sioux Falls native pilots the 71 past Prouty before the end of lap 2. A couple of restarts prevented Olivier from really getting comfortable. They also gave number 8 starter Tim Dan a shot. The 40 car almost gets the 71 here, but Olivier up to the task. He retakes the lead coming out of turn 4, and that would seal it. Zach Olivier goes on to win the Mark Lloyd Memorial, which was part of a big weekend for him. He also won Saturday at I-90.
We've got one more stop on this week's highlight circuit. We'll recap all the action from River City Speedway after this. And welcome back. Well, with a little extra time to prepare, McIntosh, Minnesota native Matt Scow had his Midwest Modified dialed in to start the season. In addition to notching a win at Devil's Lake, Scow went 1-2 in his first 2 trips to River Cities.
After a rough night Thursday at Norman County, the River Cities points leader hoped to get things back on track Friday in Grand Forks. The Wissota Street Stocks led things off. Nice change of pace for Cavalier, North Dakota's Bryce Reimer in this one. After being at or near the back in each of his first 2 outings at River Cities this season, Reimer took full advantage of his number 1 starting spot. Points leader Ryan Johnson did make a bit of a push late in the 25, but he'd have to settle for second as Reimer leads all 15 laps for the win. To the Midwest Modifieds, last week's winner Lance Schill in a good battle early with front row starter Aaron Blacklance, and it's Schill that ultimately gains the top spot. That was the decisive move, but the win would go another direction. Schill was DQ'd after the race, so the victory was actually awarded to the 39 of Jamie Dietzler. That was also good news for Scow, who ended up recording another runner-up finish. No such issues for the NOSA Sprints. In fact, they put on quite a show. The beginning was almost a replay of last week with another great start for Bob Martin, pushing him to the front of the field. But just like the previous Friday, caution flags slowed the 10 TRB's momentum. Jade Hastings all over Martin's tail shortly after one of those restarts, and he eventually uses traffic to his advantage in turn 1. But this one was far from over. Austin Pierce refused to let Hastings get comfortable at the front, and when the 8 car is forced to throttle back in turn 4, Pierce was there to pounce. The 2A slingshots into the lead, and that would do it. Pierce drives on for his 2nd consecutive win in Grand Forks. Another well-decorated RCS veteran would steal the show in the night's Wissota Late Models feature. Defending NLRA champ Brad Sang started 6th, but he would make his way to the front in a hurry. Sang working the middle and working it well. He gets by Dan Dowling for the silver spot here, then picks off Brandon Fuller for the lead the very next time around. The only real question after that was how Sang would handle traffic, and the answer? Just fine. Brad Sang's first victory of 2020 comes in dominating fashion.
Well, we have reached the white flag. We'll be back with the conclusion of our story on Sioux Speedway. Stay tuned.
Midco Motorsports on Midco Sports Network is presented by Dakota Speedway.
We wrap things up tonight with the conclusion of our historical feature on Sioux Speedway, which again was originally produced for Midco Sports Magazine. The story resumes with the events that ultimately led to the demise of that facility and its direct correlation to the resurgence of Huset's.
Success can be a tricky thing. In the case of Sioux Speedway, good racing and great crowds had gone hand in hand from the beginning. But by the summer of 1957, the drivers were starting to feel like their role in that was being undervalued. At the time, they were racing for 40% of the gate, which worked out to anywhere from $600 to $900 depending on crowd size. On the night of the season championship, a group of them approached Van An and threatened to boycott the race without a guaranteed purse of $1,000. Van An reluctantly agreed, and the show went on as scheduled. Unfortunately, the friction didn't exactly dissipate. The normal 40% purse was re-established for the start of the following season. That only furthered the frustrations for modified drivers, who were now forced to split that money with the strictly stock class. So in July of 1958, they decided to try and force Van An's hand again. Only this time, he didn't flinch.
All the modified cars, as they came down what is now a 6-mile road, but that was a gravel road back in those days, they just lined up out there on the road, and they wouldn't come into the pit area.
They were demanding more money for the purse, and from what I understand, my father and his group of guys says, "Goodbye, go. We'll just shut her down."
So they all turned around and went back home, and there was no races that night.
The very next night, a group of those racers congregated in a YMCA meeting room in downtown Sioux Falls. It was there that they formed the Sioux Falls Stock Car Association and elected car owner Fred Buckmiller as president. Members then purchased shares of stock in the group and used that money, approximately $14,000, to purchase Tilhuset's racetrack.
When they bought that place, calling it rundown was being nice. It had sat idle all that time, and their weeds were growing 3 and 4 foot high. And besides that, Till took a lot of his old tractors and trucks and things and put them down there. It looked like a junkyard. You couldn't even tell that there was a racetrack down there.
It didn't stay that way for long. Just 2 weeks after leaving Sioux Speedway in the rearview mirror, Buckmiller's group held its first race at Huset Speedway. And with that, the landscape of racing in South Dakota had officially taken a left turn.
The roles were completely reversed. Now it was Huset Speedway where everybody was going.
To a young Tom Van An, the success of Huset Speedway was a bitter pill to swallow, especially following the death of his father in 1962, when he was just 11 years old.
I grew up thinking that Huset Speedway closed my father's track. I mean, ran it out of business or for whatever reason, not knowing the story, not knowing what happened.
Van An's stance softened by the time he turned 18. That's when his needs had started to outweigh that lack of interest, and it led him to the very threshold he never thought he'd cross.
There wasn't any summer jobs for an 18-year-old kid in Sioux Falls, so I went out to the track to see Joe Kusler, who was the concessionaire for my father, and I, looking for at least a little bit of work. Joe says, "You're not working for me. You're not hawking popcorn. You're too good for that. Go down and see Buck."
Buck was, of course, Fred Buckmiller, the same man who'd played such an instrumental role in the demise of Sioux Speedway.
And I says, "Who's Buck?" And he says, "He runs the place." So I went down, he was pulling away from the pump. I jumped onto the running board on the passenger side, stuck my head in. I says, "Buck, my name's Tom Van An, looking for some work." And like he saw a ghost.
That reaction likely had everything to do with Van An's late father. In retrospect, Buckmiller, who by that time had gained his own first-hand experience in running a racetrack, may have been having some regrets.
Years and years later, Fred Buckmiller says, "What we did to Bob Van An and Sioux Speedway was terrible. We should never have done that." The fact of the matter was, there were nights when 40% of the gate was over $1,000. So Buckmiller himself admitted that boycotting and doing that was a bad thing. They should never have done that.
If anybody knows who Fred Buckmiller was, he's a pretty gruff man. He could be on the exterior, hard as gold. I mean, he was great. We rode around the truck with him for a couple hours. He was asking me about my mother and how I've been doing and all kinds of stories and stuff. And he says, "You're looking for work? Be here tomorrow morning." That was a Sunday. So that's how I started out there.
Van An initially handled odd jobs around the track, but he quickly climbed the ladder. Within a few years, he became a full-time member of the officiating crew and eventually took over as the director of the Huset's racing program. In that role, drawing off the teachings of Buckmiller, Van An developed a reputation for running things fast and fair. That earned him the respect of competitors and co-workers alike, and ultimately led him to be enshrined in the Huset's Hall of Fame in 2011.
I am proud of the fact that that was my father's track, and I am proud of the fact that I did go to Huset's and had a pretty good career there, and I really enjoyed it and met a lot of neat people.
Since Bob Vanahan first helped bring stock car racing to the Sioux Falls area, the sport has always managed to find a way. It's weathered the storm of conflict at every turn, which is something it's still doing today. But as the memories of Sioux Speedway continue to be swallowed by time, those that experienced its short-term greatness can't help but wonder what might have been.
I wish that they could have got together and solved their differences, because that was a popular place.
Now, since this story first aired here on Midco Sports Network in April of this year, the land that holds the remains of Sioux Speedway has officially been listed for sale. As far as Huset's is concerned, it appears racing could finally be on its way back. Per multiple reports, owner Chuck Brennan has come to an agreement to sell the track to Jackson Motorplex owner Todd Quiring. That deal is set to close within 30 days, although neither side will be commenting further until it is finalized. All right, that is our time for this week. For Jody Norstedt, producer Levi Vanderwhite, and the rest of our crew, I'm Jay Elson. We'll see you back here next Wednesday night for another episode of Midco Motorsports.